Hey guys, and welcome to the next tutorial. This one's going to be a pretty big one because this is we're going to learn classes, and classes are one of the most important things you can learn when it comes to object-oriented programming. Um, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure how well I'm going to teach this, and I know when I learned about classes, I was super confused, and it took me a really long time to kind of wrap my head around like what they are and how to use them and the differences between classes and objects. And from what I've seen with like my friends, it's the same thing. Like they learn about it and they're super confused for months, and then it just eventually clicks. And it's kind of like functions, how when it does click, you're really confused on how you were confused because they just make sense and they're super easy to understand. But just know it's okay if you are real confused, because it probably took me like 6 months to a year before classes were before they made sense. But when they do make sense, it's like, oh, how did I not understand this for the longest time? It's super easy. Um, so a class you can kind of think of like a blueprint. So I'm gonna type some code out without using classes first, and then we'll type some more code using classes, and you'll understand why they are important. So I'm going to make some variables that describe a person. So a person they have a name, and we'll say the name's Jody. They also have an age, we'll say it's 30, and they have a weight, which we say is 160. Um, and then we have another person, so we have like name 2 equals Johnny, age equals 40, and weight, well, actually, sorry, we have to change it to age 2 because it's going to overwrite age up here. So we have age 2 and then weight 2 equals 200. So we have 2 different people here. We have their names, their ages, and their weights. And then we have name 2 down here and age 3. And then we can add like a third person. Name 3 equals Jim. I don't know why I'm making everyone's name start with a J, but I am. Age 3 equals 20, and weight 3 equals 500. He's a big boy. So we have 3 people here. What you would probably wonder is, like, is there an easy way to do this? Like, if we want to make a person in our code, that kind of eliminates all this redundant typing that we're typing in. And this is kind of where classes come in. We can kind of make a blueprint of what a person is. And then once we have that blueprint, anytime we want to, in our code, at any line, anytime we want to create a person, we can use like one line of code that creates this person that we can use in our code. So this is kind of the method of without using classes. We made 3 people that have an age and a weight. And I'm going to make a new file here because I want to save this one in the background. And now we're going to use a class. So we're going to make a class and call it person. And this is really important. If you see, so the word class means we're making a class. And then it's like, well, what is this class called? And we're calling it person because we're about to define what a person is for this example. Now, if you noticed, I capitalized the P in person. You remember how variable names, I said always make them lowercase? The reason why is we're going to want to, for classes, you typically want them to be capital. And the reason why is because later on when someone else is reading your code, when they see a capital letter on a word like this, they're like, oh, that's a class. He's like accessing a class. Whereas if it's all lowercase, it's like, oh, it's just a variable. And that's kind of how you can visually see classes and variables and determine which is which in your code. So you class, the name of the class, which we're calling person, and then a colon. And then press enter. Now inside here, this part's a little confusing, but it'll make sense the more you do it. It's especially got like a weird looking syntax the way you type it, but you'll get so used to typing this because you'll make classes constantly. But the first line that you want to type inside of a class is called it's called the constructor function. And I'll explain it once we type it, but essentially you're going to make a function. Remember how we learned how to make functions? You type def to define one, and then the name of it. well, the first line inside the class is actually a special function, and it has a name. It always has to be this. It's def, and then the name is underscore underscore init underscore underscore. And then you're going to want to, that's kind of how you type it right there. So it stands for initialize, and it's saying, hey, later on in our code, whenever we create a person, run this function right here automatically to set everything up for that person. Don't worry about the self keyword. I'll explain that later. Just know you have to put the word self in here. This line right here is really confusing at first. I'll try and explain it later, but just know right now that you kind of have to type that in. And it's a function that every time we make a person, this function is going to automatically get ran. So what does a person have? A person has a name, and we'll leave it blank for right now. We'll just put name equals. They have an age, and they have a weight. Now every person's going to have a different name, age, and weight when we create them. So what we would do is, in this initialize function that we've created, we're going to create some parameters. So after the self parameter, which I'll talk about that later, just understand you have to put that. After the self, what is a person? What do we have to have when we create a person? Well, we have to have a name, an age, and a weight when we create them. So these, once these get thrown into this constructor function, they get thrown into these variables down here. So name is going to equal, this person's name variable will equal the name parameter that we've thrown in. And we can name this anything. I just so happen to call it the same thing, but don't worry about that. So name will equal name. The person's age will equal whatever we throw into age. And then the person's weight will equal whatever we threw into weight. Now, another thing you'll have to type in is you'll have to put self dot before each of these variables right here. And again, don't just understand you have to type those for right now. I'll kind of explain why that is later. This will probably be multiple videos because classes are there's a lot going on when it comes to classes, but they're real important. So let's start from the top again. So you have classes, or we're creating a class, we're calling it person. And anywhere in our code when we create a person, it's gonna, this initialize function, it's also called the constructor function, it's gonna get called, this function will run as soon as we create a person. And in order to create a person, we have to have a name, an age, and a weight. And whatever we pass in for the name, age, and weight gets assigned to these variables. So each person that we create will have their own separate name, age, and weight variable. So let's go ahead and create a person now that we've created the class. So I'm going to make a person. It's a variable. I'm just going to call it Jody, and it equals a person object. So let me explain this. So I've got a variable. I've called it Jody, and it's going to equal a person. See how we type the name of the class right here, person, and then open close parentheses. So what this is doing, it's going up here and saying, oh, you want a person, and we're going to assign it to the variable Jody. All right, we'll create a person and assign it to Jody, and we have to pass in those three arguments. We have to pass in a name, age, and weight when we create a person. So the name will be Jody, the age will be 30, and the weight will be 160. So now we have a person named Jody whose age is 30 and his weight is 160. So we can do things like this, like print Jody dot weight, and this should print Jody's weight. And save it. Oh, did I? Oh, there we go. Yeah, so it printed 160. We can also print Jody dot age to get his age. So this should print the weight and age. So 160 and 30. But the good thing about classes, now that we've defined like what a person is, we can make multiple people with just one line of code. So I can do Johnny equals a person, and we need his name, age, and weight when we create him. So Johnny, let's say 40 and 200. And now what we can do, we can print Jody's weight and then print Johnny's weight and run it. So Jody's weight was 160 and Johnny's weight was 200. So we can access each of these persons' individual, these are called attributes. And they're just, an attribute's just a variable that's attached to a object. So I know this is kind of confusing. Let me explain the difference between classes and objects. So this is a class up here. A class is like the blueprint for what a person is. It doesn't technically exist in your code, meaning we haven't, at this point where my cursor is, we haven't actually created a person. But we've made the class called person, which is the blueprint for what a person is, even though we haven't technically at this point in our code created an actual person yet. Now we get to this line where I've made a variable called Jody and we've created a person using this little function right here. This is our constructor function from the person class. And once this person's created and assigned to the Jody variable, we actually call this an object now. And an object is like if the class has made an instance of itself, that instance of itself, which we made right here and we called it Jody, this is a person object and we've named it Jody. And then we've done the same thing here. We've made an instance of the person class and called it Johnny. So this is our person object called Johnny. And so these are two different people, and each one of them has their own name, age, and weight variable assigned to them. And we can access them by using this dot notation. So we can access Jody's weight by typing Jody.weight and Johnny's weight by accessing Johnny.weight. And we can also access the age and name doing the exact same thing. So to be perfectly honest with you, with classes, you can watch this video, try to make your own classes. Also watch other tutorials online. Google how do classes work. Just do a ton of research on how objects and classes in Python work, and it will make sense over time. It really confused me at first learning about classes and objects, but again, once you fully understand it, it's like, how did this not make sense in the first place? It's just kind of hard to explain to someone what they are, but once you practice, you'll get it, I promise. But I'll probably do two more videos on classes because there's a lot of things we can do with them. But I'll end this video now, and then in the next video, we'll learn how to assign methods to classes, so we can have a person object and have them like speak or eat something, or I don't know, do a bunch of crazy stuff. But I'll see you guys in the next video.